What's up, everybody? It's Jordan, and welcome to the Sports Behind Show. Today is November 17th, 2021. Today is Wednesday, so the college football playoff rankings were released last night. I'm going to be talking about my reaction towards the rankings and my personal rankings, and what I believe what the committee did wrong. There were some big signings last week, like Cam Newton with Carolina, Odell Beckham Jr. to the LA Rams. We'll talk about that. In my opinion, who's the best team in the AFC? Seems like all the top AFC teams are losing, and they've lost to some very, very bad teams. I'll also be previewing the Bengals and Raiders matchup this Sunday. The Bengals head to Las Vegas to take on the Raiders, and should be a really good game. And like I mentioned, we'll go ahead and start talking about, college football to start the show. Like I said, the rankings were released last night. These rankings were the same as last week. The committee had the same last week. So they are Michigan, number 6, Cincinnati, number 5, Ohio State, number 4, Oregon, number 3, Alabama, number 2, and Georgia, number 1. And the more I look at this just cannot be more wrong. It just not make any sense. Obviously, Georgia's number 1. There's no denying that. There's no debating that. Clearly, right now, the Georgia Bulldogs are the best team in the country, and it's not even debatable. And after that, I feel like 2 to 6 is just like a toss-up, pretty much. I feel like you're not going to find many people who would think if they do their own rankings, they're not going to have 2 to 6 exactly like the playoff committees. There's no reason Alabama should be number 2 right now. I mean, you look at it. I mean, they beat LSU recently by just 6 points. And even look a month or so ago, Alabama beat Florida by 2 points. And look how bad Florida's doing right now. They are 5-5, and they gave up 52 points against Samford. Alabama is not playing up to the potential that we've seen the Crimson Tide in the past. This is not a great Alabama team, in years past as well. So I don't think Alabama should be number 2. And something that's very interesting about this, there's a chance Alabama, everybody talks about Alabama will play Georgia in the SEC championship game. If Alabama wins, they're in. And even if they lose by, let's say 1 or 2 points, there's still a possible chance that they can get in because the playoff committee is just so biased towards SEC schools. And when you start looking, at Alabama's schedule, last game of the regular season, they play Auburn. Let's say if, Auburn beats Alabama and A&M wins out, A&M would actually represent the SEC West in the SEC championship game. So there's still a scenario, everybody's talking about Alabama and Georgia. There's a chance Alabama might not even be in the SEC championship game. I feel like people really need to start talking about the possibility of Alabama losing to Auburn. Auburn is not, great. They're very inconsistent, but its Alabama team is by no means great at all. Number 3 is Oregon. This just makes no sense. Oregon, obviously they beat Ohio State at the beginning of the year. They lost to Stanford, who is absolutely atrocious right now. And by this rankings, with Oregon being above Ohio State because they have the head-to-head, are we going to have Stanford above Oregon? No, that just does not make any sense. So why would you have Oregon above Ohio State? Because if they played right now, the Buckeyes would humiliate them. It would not even be a close game at all. Oregon has not played great. That Stanford loss is far worse than people think. This is the worst Stanford team there's been in years. And the fact that they lost to them makes their resume not look as good. I know they beat Ohio State, but that was the beginning of the year. At the time, Ohio State had the youngest team in the country. This is a completely different Buckeyes team from 2 months ago when they played Oregon. It was a great win by Oregon, beating Ohio State in Columbus. Definitely probably the best win of the season so far of any team in the country. But I just feel like Ohio State's better right now. And did play Michigan State this week. They play Michigan next week. They're going to prove that they're easily better than Oregon by, going to beat Michigan State and Michigan pretty easily this next couple of weeks. So after those games, I assume Ohio State will jump Oregon as they should, because they're with the rankings coming out several weeks ago, the original rankings. There should never be a situation, in my opinion, right now where Oregon is higher than Ohio State. I know they have the head-to-head, but there's a fine line. There's a certain point with the head-to-head. It matters, but you have to see what you've done lately. Like, for example, Michigan State beat Michigan. The committee has Michigan number 6. So why would you not have Ohio State above Oregon when that game was 2 months ago? The logic of that makes no sense to me. And after, obviously Ohio State's number 4, number 5 is Cincinnati. This makes no sense to me. Undefeated, beat Notre Dame, a top 10 school. It's just disrespectful to the Bearcats, really. The fact, that they're playing the best football they possibly can. They're doing everything they need to do. They might have, they've struggled some here recently, like Tulsa, but you look at Oklahoma State, who's ranked in the top 10. They struggled against Tulsa. Ohio State struggled against Tulsa. Cincinnati has struggled some games, but look at teams like Michigan. They've struggled against games. Alabama struggled. Oregon struggled. They lost an embarrassing Stanford team. So I just feel like, in my opinion, Cincinnati has to be in the top 4 right now. It's really disrespectful to them that they're not in the top 4. And then number 6 is Michigan. Even though they lost to Michigan State several weeks ago, I know Michigan State has the head-to-head, but when you start looking at Michigan State compared to Michigan, despite Michigan losing that game, I feel like Michigan has the better team. Michigan State has had more closer games that they potentially could have lost. Michigan State, there's times where they just barely able to squeak by and get the victory. I feel like Michigan's overall more the complete team and the better team despite losing. Very similar to like Ohio State, despite, losing head-to-head against Oregon. They are the much better team. So that's the committee's rankings. Here's my rankings. Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, Cincinnati 3, Alabama 4, Oregon 5, and Michigan 6. Like I said, Georgia's clearly the best team in the country. I really feel like Ohio State's the second best team. I feel like there's Georgia, there's a big gap, there's Ohio State, and there's a significant gap to everybody else. I just feel like right now Ohio State's the second best team in the country, and these next 2 weeks they're going to beat 2 top 10 teams, and they're going to prove that. Cincinnati, they must be in the top 4. It doesn't matter if they're 2, 3, or 4. As long as you're in the top 4 of Cincinnati, that's great. I don't get how somebody couldn't have them in the top 4. It makes no sense to me. The Cincinnati team is better than Oregon. I think the Cincinnati team is better than Michigan. I'm not saying Cincinnati is better than Alabama, but if there's ever a year that Cincinnati would beat Alabama, it would 100% be this year. I just don't know what more you can need from the Bearcats. They're undefeated. They beat Notre Dame. They beat Indiana. They're playing great football. Number 4 is Alabama. I am not high on the Crimson Tide at all. Like I've said earlier, they have been really underwhelming, honestly. They have nearly lost multiple games they shouldn't have. They lost to A&M by they lost to A&M. They were picked to beat the Aggies by 19 points, and they lost that game, and they're still number 2. But Cincinnati's undefeated, and they beat a top 10 team. The logic of that makes no sense. I do not think there should be a situation where Alabama's number 2 or number 3. I feel like Ohio State and Cincinnati should both be higher than Alabama, because some people may say Ohio State's not played a top tier team this year, which I guess could be true. They did play Oregon, but they lost to them. But you start looking at Alabama, they've not beat a great team either. They played A&M, who had a couple losses at that point with a backup quarterback, and they lost. So I feel like Alabama should be number 4. They should not be number 2 or 3. Number 5 is Oregon. That loss against Stanford is horrible. I do not think they deserve to be in the college football playoffs. I feel like all 4 of the teams that have above Oregon are better, and even Michigan, they're number 6. They might be barely just probably about the same as Oregon. There's not a big gap between those 2 teams. And number 6 is Michigan. Despite losing the head-to-head against Michigan State, I feel like they're overall the better, more complete team. They've had more complete games compared to Michigan State, who's been barely able to win some games recently. They only beat Nebraska by 3 points. They've only beat some other teams by 1 possession, where you look at them, they should have beat them a lot more. So my top 6, 6 is Michigan, 5 is Oregon, 4 is Alabama, 3 Cincinnati, 2 Ohio State, and 1 is Georgia. It's really interesting because the next couple of weeks there's going to be some major games, like Ohio State plays Michigan State this week. The following week, Ohio State plays Michigan. Not this week, but next week, Alabama plays Auburn. Cincinnati is going to see if they can, stay undefeated for the whole year. And when you start looking at Michigan, who's number 6, and Ohio State, who is number 4, it's interesting because let's say there's a scenario where, Michigan would upset Ohio State. Ohio State is out. Michigan is, assumingly in the top, more likely in the top 4, but then they play the Big Ten, championship game. So there's lots of different scenarios. You also look at some of these, teams around the 8, 9, 10 mark. Oklahoma State's in the top 10. They still have to play Oklahoma, and possibly the Big 12 championship game. They could possibly slide in the top 6, and depending how the dominoes fall, what teams lose in big games, maybe they, possibly end up in the top 4. Oklahoma, they were ranked 8 this past week. They were undefeated. They lost to Baylor. There's lots of different scenarios that could happen with the playoffs in the next couple of weeks, especially towards the end of the regular season. And just in a couple of weeks, as the conference championship games, does not seem like it should already be that time of the year already. So kind of switching gears to the NFL. Last week there were some big signings Friday. Cam Newton, it was announced that he has signed, with the Panthers on Friday, returning to Carolina. Sam Darnold's expected to be out 4 to 6 weeks. They have PJ Walker, who's not really good. The main reason he's even on the team is because, the chemistry between him and Matt Rule during their time at Temple together. So they signed Newton. He actually played kind of more snaps than people expected, Sunday against Arizona. It wasn't even expected that Newton was going to play, and when it was announced he played, it was kind of shocking because he was only announced he signed on Friday, just 2 days to prepare for the game and everything. And limited snaps he played pretty good. They had a major upset win against the Arizona Cardinals. So it's interesting because when you look at Newton, last year he wasn't really good with the Patriots. Even a year and a half prior, his last 1.5, 2 years with Carolina, he wasn't really good. They had a bad record when he started games. He was injury prone. So with Sam Darnold out, and them already beating one of the best teams in the NFL, I assume, even when Sam Darnold comes back, Cam Newton will probably be the full-time starter in Carolina because they're in a position where they're kind of in one of those possible wild card spots in the NFC. And it's crazy because this team started 3-0 and Sam Darnold looked really good. And ever since then, Sam Darnold has absolutely horrible. And, that's part of the reason why Carolina has not been winning games recently. You've seen Robbie Anderson get frustrated with Darnold on the sidelines and everything like that. So I feel like Newton signing with Carolina could really bring a spark to the Panthers. I mean, obviously we've seen it this past week with a very impressive win. But if he can just stay consistent, turnover-free football, nothing great. I mean, he'd just be average. I feel like this Panthers team's capable of being in the playoffs because, so much talent around him. You have McCaffrey, who's one of the best running backs in the NFL. DJ Moore, who's the most underrated receiver in the NFL. Robbie Anderson, he's not really been good this year. He's kind of been a bust a little bit. But I feel like with Newton, he can maybe, break out what people kind of thought he was going to be this year. So it's going to be interesting with Carolina, especially, with the NFC South, because you look at, the Saints. The Saints were off to a really good start. Then Winston goes down for the year. It was announced Michael Thomas will not be playing at all this year for the Saints. And the Buccaneers have been kind of struggling recently. They lost to the Washington this past Sunday. So it's interesting in Carolina. And, there's also another big signing on Friday as well, and that was Odell Beckham Jr. to the Los Angeles Rams. And I've said before, Odell Beckham Jr., if he signed to a, Super Bowl contender, I did not think it would be a good idea. But, after I saw this one, the more I thought about it, I actually thought it was pretty good by the Rams because you look at it, I feel like the Rams are the one team where Odell Beckham Jr. could sign and he might not make that team worse. And I feel like if Beckham signed with like a team like the Raiders, or a team like the Packers, who will need Beckham to step up and be that wide receiver one and rely on him a lot. That's why I think, he would make a team worse because he's not nearly as good as people think. I don't think he's not a wide receiver one in my opinion, and I really don't even think he's wide receiver number 2. But when you're looking at him with the Rams, I feel that is a best possible fit for him because, he already lives in LA. You have Matthew Stafford, who's one of the better quarterbacks in the league. Their running game isn't great, with Cam Akers out for the year. Cooper Kupp's been the best wide receiver this year. Robert Woods has been a really good wide receiver. They are definitely the best wide receiver duo in the NFL, in my opinion. Very, very underrated. So I feel like when you look at Beckham, he's the third best option at wide receiver. Also Van Jefferson's kind of stepped up at times as well. You also have, Tyler Higbee at tight end. So when there's so many weapons, there's not a situation where you have to rely on Odell Beckham Jr. to throw him the ball. When he's not your number one and number two, that's really good because it means you have, better receivers than him because he's not a guy who's going to step up. But it was announced recently, several days ago, that Robert Woods was announced he's out for the year with a torn ACL. So when the initial signing with Beckham, he's signing with the Rams, that's great. But then you see Woods, he's going to be out for the year. I feel like that's much more significant than people think because I don't think Beckham can fill that role as a wide receiver number two on the Rams. This is a team who passes a lot. They pass one of the most in the NFL. Matthew Stafford, it seems like he's throwing 30, 35 attempts, it seems like every single game for his whole career, with the Rams so far and during his time with Detroit. But, think of how many targets are going to go to Beckham now and opposed to if Woods was healthy. That's interesting to me because, I feel like that was a perfect plan by the Rams by signing Beckham to make him your wide receiver number three, but then Woods goes down. You don't know if Beckham could live up to the wide receiver number two hype. To me, he's the most overrated receiver in the NFL easily. Take away the catch, he would not be nearly as popular. Let's say if he played for the Lions or the Browns or the Bengals, he would not be nearly as popular, and he would never be considered the top 5, top 10 wide receiver. But since he played for a top market team like New York, he's this great receiver when he's not. He's always injury prone. And that's something else. When you look at Woods already going down, Beckham's had a history of injuries the past couple of years. Then if he goes down, all of a sudden, you have Van Jefferson who is okay, but you don't want him being your wide receiver number two. And then you have Cooper Kupp. Teams start double coveraging Kupp. Then you have a problem with the Rams. But if you're a Rams fan, obviously you hope Beckham can stay healthy because, if he goes down, then all of a sudden, we're talking like a week ago, the Rams having one of the best wide receiver corps in the NFL. All of a sudden, they are having not one of the worst, but probably going down to about average just to the, lack of depth with players getting hurt. And, there's so many, different, topics with the NFL, and it's interesting the past couple of weeks, really this past week, with Beckham signing with the Rams, Newton signing with the Panthers. The Panthers had a big upset win against the Cardinals. The Rams actually, lost this past week against the 49ers, which was a big upset in Monday Night Football. Then you start looking at some of these teams in the AFC. This past Thursday, the Dolphins, beat the Baltimore Ravens. And it's crazy because this AFC right now is really a toss-up to me. I feel like there's one team that stands out, and everybody else is just kind of below them, kind of like Georgia in college football. Georgia's clearly the best team, and then you have a significant drop-off. And I feel like that team in the AFC is the Titans. The Titans only have 2 losses right now. They lost the first game of the year against the Cardinals. And at the time, that was kind of a surprising loss for the Titans. But looking back, the Cardinals were the last unbeaten team in the NFL. And they also lost to the Jets a month or so ago in overtime. But, looking at that, they had many players injured in that game. And, they have the best record in the AFC. They only have 2 losses. Like I mentioned, they are playing great football right now, even without, Derrick Henry. They are 8-2. Ryan Tannehill has stepped up when he's needed to with Henry going down. Their defense has stepped up. They played the Rams a couple weeks ago, and they gave up only 16 points to a very explosive Rams team. And you look at other teams like the Ravens and the Bengals, the Raiders, the Bills. All these teams have had games where, they're not really – they were expected to win, but they just have pitiful, embarrassing games and they lose. The Bills lost to the Jaguars recently, which is just mind-boggling because you never think that would happen. The Bengals have lost to the Jets. Recently they've also lost to the Bears. The Raiders have, they started off 5-2. They've lost the last 2 games. The Ravens lost to the Dolphins on Thursday Night Football, and then a couple weeks ago, at the time, most people thought they were the best team in the AFC. Not me, because I'm not really high on the Ravens at all. But they got embarrassed at the time by the Bengals, losing by over 20 points. So it's crazy because this NFL season, heading into the year, you kind of think you have a general idea the top couple of teams in each division. Obviously, when you think of the NFC, you would kind of think of the Packers, Buccaneers, and the Rams, maybe a couple other teams. And then you think of the AFC. To me, I kind of thought it was going to be the Bills, the Chiefs, the Browns, those top 3 teams. And right now, I don't think any of those teams are the best team in the AFC. Honestly, the Chiefs, I don't know if they're even the best team in their division. The Browns aren't the best team in their division. The Bills, they are the best team in the AFC East, but they have better start playing like it because, with the Patriots' very impressive win against the Browns this past Sunday, it might be closer than we originally thought in the AFC East. But I feel like the Titans are just the best team in the NFL, right? The best team in the AFC right now. I know they had that, lost against the Jets, but that was a month or 2 ago. They're playing complete football right now. They're playing great, and they've had some very impressive wins. And when you look at this, Titans team, they did lose to the Cardinals. They lost to the Jets in week 4, but they've also beat the Bills, who at the time were really, really good, which they are still a really good team. They beat the Rams by 12 points in LA. They beat the Chiefs 27-3. In that game where the Titans beat the Chiefs 27-3, Derrick Henry had more passing touchdowns than Patrick Mahomes. That tells you how good this Titans team is. And I feel like Derrick Henry, he's expected to be back towards the end of the regular season. This team, looking at their schedule, it looks really, really easy. And once you get Henry back, I feel like this Titans team is a legitimate Super Bowl contender, which is crazy to me because I did not think that was going to happen throughout this season. I really feel like Mike Vrabel deserves more credit. He is without a doubt the most underrated head coach in the NFL, in my opinion. I don't think it's particularly close. He's made Titans consistently one of the best teams in NFL for the past several years. And, he's continuing to do that this year by making the Titans look, as of right now, the best team in the AFC. And, I kind of mentioned, when you think of teams, all these AFC teams losing. And just a couple weeks ago, the Bengals were 5-2 and the Raiders were 5-2. All of a sudden, the Bengals are 5-4 and the Raiders are 5-4. Kind of previewing this game between the Bengals and the Raiders, it's interesting because when both these teams were 5-2, they were exceeding expectations. The Bengals were first in the AFC North. They were also first in the AFC. The Raiders were first in the AFC West. And then all of a sudden, both these teams lose 2 straight games, not playing, great. The Raiders recently lost to the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. They also lost to the Giants the week prior. The Bengals got humiliated by the Browns in the week prior. They lost to the Jets. So both these teams, had one loss where they got humiliated. In the other game, prior to that, they had games where they should have won and they just did not end up winning. And it's interesting because, when this Raiders team is 5-2, obviously they lost 2 straight games. But, with everything that's happened with Las Vegas this season, you look at the John Gruden situation. You look at Henry Ruggs. With his car accident and everything like that. You look at, Damon Arnett, threatened to, shoot a fan on social media. It's just crazy with this Raiders team right now. And the fact they've went through so much adversity and they've still, have played pretty decent despite now only being 1 game over 500. And the Bengals also only 1 game over 500 now. And when you're 5-2, that's great. You're exceeding expectations. But when both of these teams lose 2 straight games, now you're kind of where you kind of thought you were going to be, in that 5-4 mark, kind of for both of these teams. And to me, this is going to be a really good game. I honestly think this could go either way because, heading into that Jets game, in my opinion, the Bengals are the top 10 defense in the last 2 games. have been atrocious. We gave up over 400 passing yards against Mike White. Everybody loves to talk about Mike White, but at the same time, I feel like we kind of prevented that some because over 150 of those passing yards were just to running backs. The week after, once again, we made Baker Mayfield look like he was an MVP candidate. Seems like every single time we play Cleveland, he plays great against us. So our defense has not really played good recently. And, this Raiders team, that they've been just super, super inconsistent. I mean, there's no other way to put that for the Raiders, honestly. And, I mean, they gave up over 40 points to the Chiefs recently. I mean, they weren't even able to score more than 24 points against the Giants the week prior. And it's interesting because with the Raiders, they have Darren Waller, who's without a doubt one of the best tight ends in the NFL. But they don't have, the top receiver. They had Henry Ruggs, and in that situation, came up, and they no longer have him. And, at the time before that incident, maybe they thought, Beckham could maybe go to the Raiders to kind of improve their wide receiver core. And you've seen the past couple of weeks, with them losing to the Chiefs and them losing to the Giants. I mean, the wide receiver core is very, very thin right now. They have Hunter Renfrow, who's nothing great. They have Brian Edwards, who's all right. But when you play against a team who is more so, pass heavy, it seems like, than, run heavy. Because look at this Raiders team. There's only been one time this year where the Raiders have had a 100-yard rusher. And they kind of seem like they kind of tend to pass more than they run. When you don't have that star receiver, you have that tight end, but if you don't have that star receiver, it's going to be harder for you to throw the ball. And we kind of seen, the implications of that the last several weeks where the Raiders have lost back-to-back games. I feel like this game's going to be close. This defense for the Bengals recently has not been able to step up, but this Raiders team, offense-wise, has not been able to step up either due to their lack of depth at wide receiver. I'm going to take the Bengals in this one, not being biased. I'm going to say 27-23. It should be a really good game. I honestly do think it could go either way. But both these teams being 5-4 originally, they were 5-2. I feel like whoever loses this game is more than likely out of the playoff picture because you're looking at these two teams right now. They have a significantly hard schedule the remainder of the year. The Bengals, most every single team they play for the rest of the year is 500 or better, except for the 49ers, who, they would totally be 500 if it wasn't for injuries. Then you look at the Raiders. They still had to play the Chiefs again. They still had to play the Chargers, the Broncos. The Bengals, all those teams are, 500 or better. That's not including their other games as well. So I feel like whoever loses this game is more than likely out of playoff contention. It's a must-win for both of these teams because you do not want to start off 5-2 and then all of a sudden be 5-5 because, that's kind of what happened to the Raiders last season. Last year the Raiders started off 5-3, started off really, really good. They finished the year 8-8. So, if the Raiders would lose this game and start to kind of go in a losing streak, it's not something they haven't seen because, they saw it last year. Can't wait for that game. Hopefully the Bengals are able to get the win. That really kind of about does it for this video. Kind of talked about the college football playoff rankings released last night, my reaction towards it, my personal college football playoff ranking. Cam Newton to the Carolina Panthers. Odell Beckham signs with the LA Rams. Who is the best team in the AFC, kind of previewing the Bengals and Raiders game this Sunday. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like this video and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate it. And we'll see you all next time on the Sports 200 Show.